I kept my hands perfectly still on the edge of the conference table, even though everything inside me wanted to stand up and walk out of that room. My brother-in-law was sitting across from me in a charcoal blazer he definitely bought for this occasion, and next to him was a woman I had never seen before in my life. She looked maybe 24, 25. She had her hands folded over her stomach in that particular way that women do when they want a room full of people to notice. I noticed. I also noticed that my husband had been dead for exactly 41 days. I picked up my coffee cup, took a slow sip, and looked at Donald Whitfield, my late husband's older brother. And I thought about something Nathan told me 8 months ago, sitting on our back porch in September. The kind of warm evening where you don't want to go inside. He had said, "Diana, if anything ever happens to me, don't trust my brother anywhere near the paperwork." I had laughed and told him he was being paranoid. He wasn't laughing. He just nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. I should have asked him more questions that night. I didn't. We went inside and made dinner and watched television, and I thought we had decades left to have that conversation. We didn't. Nathan died on a Tuesday morning in February. Black ice on I-76. He was 38 years old. He coached youth soccer on weekends, made his own sourdough starter, called his mother every Sunday without fail. He was the kind of man who remembered the names of waitstaff and used them. He was the kind of man you don't think you'll lose at 38. I was 32. We had been married 6 years. We had a daughter named Cecily who was 4 and who still asked me sometimes if Daddy was coming back from his work trip. That is the life I was living when I walked into Hargrove and Associates that Wednesday morning and sat down across from my brother-in-law and a pregnant stranger. The attorney's name was Patricia Ellison. She had been Nathan's lawyer for 11 years, longer than I had known him, and when I called her the morning after Nathan's accident, she had said something I didn't fully understand at the time. She said, "Diana, I need you to know that Nathan was very thorough." Just that. Very thorough. I had assumed she meant his estate planning in general. I held on to that phrase later like a lifeline. Patricia set a folder on the table and looked at everyone in the room in turn before she opened it. There was me. There was Donald. There was the young woman whose name I still didn't know. There was Donald's attorney, a man named Greg something, who kept clicking his pen. Donald leaned forward before Patricia could say a word. "I think before we get started," he said, "there's something that needs to be addressed." He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Kayla. Kayla and Nathan were involved for the past 2 years. She's currently 4 months pregnant with his child. As Nathan's firstborn, that child will have a legal claim to a portion of the estate." I looked at Kayla. She looked at the table. I looked at Donald. I had spent 41 days being the grieving widow, and I was tired. I was so tired. But in that moment, I felt something sharpen inside me like a blade being drawn out slowly. Because I had heard those exact words before, not from Donald. From Nathan, 3 weeks before he died. Nathan had come home from a dinner with Donald looking pale and strange. I asked him what was wrong. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen sink for a long moment before he turned around. "My brother is going to try something," he said. "I don't know what yet. But he's been asking me questions about the business valuation, about what Cecily would inherit versus a potential second child." He brought it up casually, like it was hypothetical. He set the glass down. "It wasn't hypothetical, Diana." I had asked him what he meant. "I think he's putting something together," Nathan said. "I'm going to handle it. I just need you to know. If something happens and things get complicated, Patricia has everything. You go to Patricia first. Before you talk to anyone else, before you sign anything, you go to Patricia." 3 weeks later, he was gone. And I had done exactly what he told me to do. So I sat there at that table and let Donald finish his speech. He was very polished about it. He talked about Nathan's wishes, about family, about doing right by an innocent child. Greg the attorney nodded along. Kayla looked at her hands. When Donald was done, I said, "Thank you for sharing that." He blinked. He had been expecting tears or anger or some kind of collapse. People always think grief makes you stupid. It doesn't. Sometimes it just makes you very, very quiet. Patricia opened her folder. "Since we're all here," she said, Why don't we proceed? What Patricia read over the next 40 minutes was the most methodical document I have ever heard in my life. Nathan had revised his will 11 weeks before his death. The original will, drawn up when we first married, had left everything divided between me and any future children we might have, with a standard provision for his mother. The revised will did all of that and then added 17 additional pages. Those pages addressed, specifically and by name, the possibility of a claim from an outside party alleging paternity of a child conceived during the marriage. Nathan had been tested. He had documentation. He had, it turned out, undergone a vasectomy 4 years prior due to a medical issue that we had discussed privately and that I will not share here because it was his and he deserved to keep something. The vasectomy was documented by 2 physicians. The revision to his will included a clause that any paternity claim would require genetic verification against banked samples. Samples Nathan had deposited with a fertility clinic under a separate legal agreement, with Patricia named as the authorized party to release them. He had thought of everything. Donald's color changed about halfway through the reading. By the time Patricia reached the genetic verification clause, Greg had stopped clicking his pen entirely. Kayla was looking at Donald now instead of the table. I want to be honest about what happened in me during those 40 minutes because this isn't a simple story and I was not a simple person sitting in that chair. I had known about Nathan's vasectomy. I was the one who had driven him to the appointment and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours reading a magazine I still remember, an old issue of Sunset with a picture of a garden on the cover. I knew there was no biological possibility of what Donald was claiming. I had known that walking in. What I hadn't known, what gutted me in a quiet, private way while Patricia was reading, was how much work Nathan had done in those final weeks. 11 weeks before he died, while I was putting Cecily to bed and making grocery lists and living our ordinary life, my husband had been sitting in this office preparing for a war he wasn't sure he would survive to fight himself. He had written a letter. Patricia read it at the end. It was addressed to me. He wrote, "I don't know if you'll ever need this. I hope you don't. But if you're sitting in that room and Donald is there and something feels wrong, I want you to know I saw it coming. I tried to stop it before it started. I love you more than I know how to say in a legal document, so I'll say it the only way I can here. I made sure you and Cecily are taken care of. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't be afraid to fight. You're better at it than you think." I kept my face completely still. I had gotten very good at that. Donald's attorney asked for a recess. They stepped out into the hallway and I could hear voices but not words. Patricia handed me a box of tissues I didn't use and a glass of water I did. "He came to me in November," she said quietly. "He said he'd been having dinners with his brother and the conversations were making him uneasy. He didn't have proof of anything yet. He just wanted to be prepared." "Did he know about the woman?" I asked. "He suspected Donald had found someone willing to make a claim," she said. "He didn't know who." I thought about Kayla. She was young. She looked scared. I didn't know her story. Whether she had come into this willingly or whether my brother-in-law had found her in some moment of desperation and offered her something she needed. That was not my problem to solve, but I wasn't going to pretend I didn't wonder. When Donald came back in, he sat down heavily. Greg put some papers into his briefcase. Kayla had a look on her face that I recognized because I had worn it myself in the first days after Nathan died. The look of someone realizing the ground they were standing on was not solid. Donald looked at me and said, "This isn't over." I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "You have no idea what Nathan was really like." And I said, "I drove him to his vasectomy appointment and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours. I know exactly what he was like. I'd like you to leave now." What came after was not simple or fast. I want to be clear about that because I've seen enough of these stories play out where justice arrives cleanly and completely and in a single afternoon. It didn't. Donald contested the will. It took 4 months and cost me money I could afford but resented spending. There was a deposition. There were lawyers on both sides going back and forth about the validity of the genetic verification clause and the timeline of the will revision and half a dozen other things that made me feel like I was living inside a spreadsheet. The genetic test confirmed what Nathan's medical records already showed. The claim dissolved. Kayla did not contest anything on her own. I later learned, through Patricia, that she had been told Nathan was estranged from me, that we had separated, that she was in a real relationship with a man whose wife didn't care about him anymore. That is what my brother-in-law had told her. I don't know if I believe all of it, but I believe enough of it to feel something complicated that isn't quite pity and isn't quite anger. Donald was found to have misrepresented material facts in the initial claim filing. His attorney quietly withdrew from the case. Donald did not go to prison. I want to be honest, because the version of the story where he goes to prison is the satisfying version, not the true version. What happened is that he was sanctioned, he paid legal fees, and he lost the only thing he'd been trying to get in the first place. The business, Nathan's software consulting firm, which he had built over 9 years and which was valued at just over $1 million at the time of his death, went to me, to Cecily, to the life Nathan had spent 11 weeks making sure we would have. There is a thing that happens after you survive something like this, where people expect you to be transformed. They want you to say that you're grateful, or that it gave you perspective, or that you've learned to live in the present. I understand why. It's a neater story. Here's the true version. I am tired. I am still tired 6 months later. I miss my husband with a specific physical ache that I cannot describe except to say that it lives somewhere behind my sternum, and it doesn't leave. Cecily asked me last week if Daddy put our house in a safe place before he went away, because she had overheard me talking on the phone and misunderstood something. I sat on the kitchen floor with her for a long time and I said, "Yes, baby. Daddy made sure everything was safe for us." She accepted that. Kids do. I kept the firm. I brought in a managing director, a woman named Susan who had worked with Nathan for 6 years and who understood the business better than I did. I come in on Thursdays. I'm learning. Nathan would find that extremely funny and also extremely predictable. He always said I was more capable than I gave myself credit for. I have not spoken to my brother-in-law since the day in Patricia's office when I asked him to leave. I don't expect to. His mother called me once, 3 months after everything was settled, and she was not unkind. She said she didn't know what Donald had done until it was already done. I don't know if that's true. I told her she was welcome to see Cecily because Cecily deserves grandparents and whatever her son did is not her fault. She came for Cecily's birthday in April. She cried when she saw her. We didn't talk about Donald. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood. Patricia sent me a card when the case closed. Handwritten, which I was not expecting. She wrote, "Nathan chose well." Just that. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand and it's still there. I go back to that September evening sometimes. Nathan on the back porch telling me not to trust his brother near the paperwork. Me laughing it off. The warm air and the sound of the neighbor's dog 2 houses over. I think about all the things I didn't ask. I think about the version of me that was sitting next to him, happy and unaware, while he was already starting to worry. I think about the 41 days between losing him and sitting in that conference room, and how I held myself together by doing exactly what he told me to do. Go to Patricia first, before anyone else, before you sign anything. He knew me well enough to know I'd be scared and that I'd need a specific instruction, not a general one. He knew I'd be in a room full of people trying to take advantage of my grief and that what I'd need wasn't comfort. It was a plan. That's who he was. He made a plan for a disaster he didn't know was coming and he left it in the hands of his attorney and he trusted me to find it. I found it. Cecily starts kindergarten in August. She has his eyes. That particular dark brown that looks almost black indoors and honey-colored in the sun. She told me last week that when she grows up, she wants to be a soccer coach and a baker and also someone who helps animals. I told her that sounded like a full schedule. She said, "Daddy had a full schedule." I said, "He really did. We're going to be okay." Not because everything is okay. It isn't. And it probably won't be for a long time, and I've stopped pretending otherwise. But because Nathan was thorough and because I listened and because some people love you in ways that outlast them. That's the whole story. That's all of it. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since everything happened. Not in any grand or cosmic sense, just the ordinary human kind. The kind where choices pile up quietly over years and then one day they're all sitting in the same room together and you finally see the whole shape of what people have been building. Donald spent a long time believing that grief makes people careless. That a widow with a 4-year-old in a business she didn't fully understand yet would be too exhausted to look closely at anything. He wasn't wrong that I was exhausted. He was wrong about what exhaustion does to some people. Sometimes it doesn't make you careless. Sometimes it makes you very, very careful, because you know you cannot afford not to be. Nathan understood that about me before I did. That's the part I keep coming back to. He didn't leave me instructions because he thought I was weak. He left them because he knew the situation would be designed to make me feel weak and he wanted to get ahead of it. That's not the same thing. There's a kind of intelligence in knowing the difference between what's actually true and what someone is trying to make you believe. And Nathan had that in abundance. He passed some of it to me by simply trusting that I could use it. I think about what Donald chose and I think about what it cost him. Not just the legal fees, not just the sanctions, though those were real and they mattered. I mean the deeper cost. He looked at his brother's death and saw an opportunity. That's a choice a person makes. And it doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in 100 small moments before that, where you decide that what you want is more important than what's right, where you tell yourself that the rules are for other people, where you find someone vulnerable and calculate what you can take from them. By the time Donald walked into Patricia's office with Kayla beside him, he had already become someone who does that. The consequences just made it visible. I don't think I'm a remarkable person for getting through this. I want to be honest about that. I followed instructions that my husband left me. I stayed quiet when people expected me to fall apart. I went to the right lawyer at the right time. Those things sound simple, and they were also the hardest things I've done. Doing the right thing when you're in pain and scared and a room full of people are counting on your confusion. That takes something. I don't have a clean word for what it takes. Stubbornness, maybe. Or just the refusal to let someone else's plan become your reality. Cicely's going to ask me someday what happened after her father died. She'll be old enough to understand the real version, and I'll tell her. I'll tell her that her father was smart enough to protect us before he was gone, and that when someone tried to take what he'd built, we didn't let them. I'll tell her that the people who tried to take it are not part of our lives anymore. And that's not a punishment. It's just what happens when you show someone exactly who you are. She deserves to know that story. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's dramatic. But because it's true, and true things are worth knowing. Her father believed that, so do I.